He slapped me. Right there in the middle of a courtroom, open-handed, loud, unapologetic. The room went silent. The judge froze. My brother lunged. But I didn't move. I reached into my coat and pulled out my badge, because the woman he thought was just another face in the crowd was a decorated Army captain, a federal agent, and his worst nightmare. What started as one act of brutality ignited a nationwide movement that brought down a corrupt police empire, exposed a secret war room of evidence, and proved one thing to the world. You can slap the truth, but you'll never silence it. That day he slapped me, open-handed, full force. Right across the cheek in front of a room packed with attorneys' families, and a judge banging her gavel so hard it could have cracked the bench. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. My head turned with the blow, but my eyes never left his. "Out of line, ma'am," he barked, chest heaving with fake authority, spittle flying with every syllable. You don't speak unless spoken to. He didn't know, not yet. He didn't know who I was, what I was. He didn't know he'd just struck a federal agent, a decorated Army captain, an undercover operative with a badge in her pocket, and a courtroom full of eyes that were about to witness the unraveling of a system that had protected him for far too long. Behind him, Chief Morris Denton stood with his arms crossed, smirking, that smug expression of an old war dog who thought the world still belonged to men like him. Clean-shaven, polished shoes, rank stripes like armor. His power was paper-thin, but no one ever dared to tear it. Until today. My name is Naomi Ellis. I wasn't born for war. I was born for peace. Raised in Georgia, just outside Macon. My mom was a librarian who believed in whispering truths, not shouting them. My dad, a postal worker, who gave every neighbor the same nod of respect. But peace doesn't grow where injustice is planted. And in my line of work, I learned early silence is the soil where monsters thrive. I served 15 years in Army intelligence, tours across the Middle East, extraction operations in South Sudan. I've held the hands of soldiers bleeding out beside me. I've translated confessions from warlords who thought I didn't understand their dialect. I've stared down rifles and smiled. So, when they asked me to go undercover in my own country to investigate a surge of police brutality complaints centered around one department in Florida, I didn't hesitate. What I didn't expect was to be assaulted in court before I could even flash my badge. It started with a traffic stop. A 19-year-old black kid named Malik Jefferson pulled over for a busted taillight. Next thing you know, Officer Knox had him face down on the pavement with a knee to his back, yelling, "Stop," resisting to a kid who wasn't even moving. The body cam footage mysteriously malfunctioned, but a brave woman across the street caught it all on her phone. My team reviewed it. My blood boiled. They needed someone on the inside. That someone became me. I posed as Malik's aunt. A grieving, angry relative demanding justice. No legal training, just a name and an address. It was enough to get me into the system, into the courthouse, into Officer Knox's direct line of fire. But I underestimated how fast hate travels in places like this. The morning of the hearing, I wore a plain navy blue dress. No makeup, no earrings. Just me, my braid tucked under a headscarf, and a calm expression that betrayed nothing. I sat in the courtroom pew beside Jerome, my younger brother, and Malik's public defender in this charade. He wore a borrowed suit and eyes full of fire. "You sure about this, sis?" he whispered. "We could pull the plug. Transfer jurisdiction. Your badge could override everything." "No," I said. "We catch a snake by letting it slither." and slither he did. Bradley Knox strutted into the courtroom with the swagger of a man who believed the world owed him silence. Thick neck, square jaw. His belt sagged from the weight of too many toys taser cuffs baton. He glanced at me, dismissed me. That was his first mistake. His second was lying. He told the judge Malik lunged, that he feared for his life, that he used minimum force. I could hear the lie dripping off his tongue like oil. But he spoke with such confidence, like the truth was his to reshape. I stood up. "Objection," I said. The room turned. "You can't object," Knox sneered, spinning toward me. "You're not counsel." I didn't flinch. "Officer Knox, did you file your use of force report within the standard 48-hour window?" His eyes narrowed. "That's not your concern, because according to department logs, it was filed 5 days late. After the footage surfaced. You're disrupting court proceedings," he growled, stepping forward. "Did you know your precinct has the highest excessive force complaints per capita in the state?" He was red now, boiling. I knew the signs, the storm behind the eyes, the sweat forming at the brow. He took one more step. "You better shut your mouth before I make you," he hissed, and I smiled. "Make me then." That's when it happened. The slap, loud, angry, cowardly. Time didn't freeze. It shattered. Gasps. Phones lifted. A baby started crying. The judge's gavel slammed like thunder, her voice yelling over the chaos. My brother lunged between us, but I raised a hand. Stopped him. I reached slowly into my coat pocket and pulled out my badge. Federal, Department of Justice, Internal Affairs Division. I held it high. Let the cameras catch every gleam of gold. "My name is Captain Naomi Ellis," I said, voice steady, cheek still burning. "You just assaulted a federal agent in open court." Bradley Knox's face drained of blood. Chief Denton uncrossed his arms, but it was too late. The courtroom had already turned. Whispers turned into outcries. The judge stood. The bailiff moved. I kept talking. "I've been investigating this department for 6 months. What happened to Malik Jefferson is not an isolated incident, and what just happened here, I turned to the audience. This is what happens when racism is left unchecked, when power goes unchallenged, when the law is used as a weapon instead of a shield." I saw Denton's lips move. "Get her out." But I wasn't finished. "You can try to bury the truth, but I've recorded everything. Every fake report, every doctored file, every time you silenced good cops who spoke up. You think you're the system." I stepped closer to Knox. "You're the virus, and I'm the damn cure." The court descended into chaos. Reporters swarmed. The judge called for recess. Knox was escorted out, handcuffed, trembling, his career evaporating with each camera flash. Denton. He tried to disappear, but I had more to say. "This isn't just about me," I said, voice raised over the buzz. "It's about Malik. It's about every mother who never got a phone call. Every father who was told their kid matched a description. This ends now." And just like that, the silence was shattered. Applause erupted. A mother in the back cried into her hands. My brother gripped my shoulder, whispering, "You did it." No, I'd only just begun. They say the loudest moments in history don't come from cannons or gunfire. They come in the silence after. That courtroom, once ringing with gasps and chaos, now sat cold and stunned. You could hear the ceiling fan turning. You could hear the reporters clicking their pens, scribbling notes with wide eyes and open mouths. The kind of silence that feels like a tide pulling back right before the tsunami hits. I stood still, badge in hand, cheek red with the shape of his hate. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. That would come later, maybe. But not now. Not in front of them. This moment wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who'd ever sat in a courtroom and been treated like a threat before they could even speak. It belonged to Malik. It belonged to my ancestors. Judge Helen Patel finally broke the silence. Her voice didn't waver. "Captain Ellis," she said with careful formality, "please remain present for this court. Bailiff, detain Officer Knox immediately under federal assault charges." 2 officers crossed the courtroom floor with the slow, deliberate grace of men who knew they were walking into history. I saw Knox's face red, then pale, then blank. That smugness had drained like dirty water down a cracked sink. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. He didn't look at me again. And yet, in some twisted part of me, I knew he still didn't understand why this was happening. The holding room behind the courthouse smelled of varnish and old sweat. The walls were pale blue, designed to calm the nerves. It didn't work. Jerome paced beside me, still buzzing like a shorted wire. "You're insane," he muttered for the 5th time, running his hands through his short curls. "Naomi, you know what you just did. You nuked the case." "No," I replied, sitting calmly. I revealed it. He turned eyes wild. "That wasn't the plan. You were supposed to stay deep. We had a longer strategy. The strategy changed the second he hit me. We were both right. And both wrong." But what he didn't know, what no one in that courthouse knew, was that I hadn't walked into that courtroom unprepared. That slap wasn't the start of the story. It was the fuse to a bomb I'd been building for 6 months. 3 weeks ago, I'd visited the precinct under the guise of filing a complaint. I wore a wig, fake glasses, spoke with a slight southern accent, and made myself smaller, quieter. The receptionist barely looked at me, but I saw everything. I saw a Blue Lives Matter poster taped over a civil rights pamphlet on the wall. I saw a black officer trying to speak up in the break room, only to be cut off mid-sentence by Chief Denton himself. I saw Knox watching body cam footage like it was a highlight reel, laughing, pointing, reenacting chokeholds with his buddies, like it was a locker room. And every time they laughed, I smiled politely. Then I wrote it all down. Later that week, I accessed internal servers using a backdoor authorization only a federal agent could have. Files began to flood my drive, missing reports, camera glitches, citations for attitude, dismissed IA complaints, memos, marked confidential that read more like scripts from a mafia movie than a police force. There was a pattern. They didn't just cover for each other, they celebrated it. Knox had 8 unresolved complaints. Denton had squashed every single one, and every name on those reports, brown or black. I brought the files to the DOJ. They told me we need one moment, a trigger, something undeniable. Well, now they had it. Jerome finally stopped pacing. "What now?" "Now," I said, "we give them no place to run." I pulled out a flash drive from my coat, the kind shaped like a dog tag. "This has everything. We release it tonight. Full transparency. No redactions. We do this on our terms." He stared at it. "That's a war move." "No," I said, standing. "It's a liberation." Later that evening, I sat at a battered diner across the street from the courthouse. My cheek still tingled from the impact. Every time I touched it, it reminded me I was alive. Not just alive, but awake. The TV above the counter played the local news. I watched my own face flash across the screen. They played the moment of the slap, then froze the frame as I raised my badge. A shocking twist today, as an undercover federal agent revealed herself after being assaulted in court by Officer Bradley Knox. This comes amidst ongoing scrutiny into systemic abuse in the Palm City Police Department. The reporter's voice faded behind my thoughts. It wasn't about fame. It never was. But something about seeing the truth broadcast in a world that so often buried it, it felt like breathing after nearly drowning. A waitress approached nervously, offering a coffee refill. "Ma'am, I just want to say thank you for what you did." I nodded quietly. Outside, cars passed. Inside, phones lit up with messages. A ripple had begun. And ripples, if fed with truth, turn into waves. Back at the precinct, chaos reigned. Denton was already on the phone with someone higher up. His voice cracked through gritted teeth. "I want her silenced. No interviews. No press access. You tell the mayor we're containing this." But it was too late. I had filed an emergency report with Internal Affairs and forwarded it to 3 independent watchdog groups. By midnight, the files were online. Hundreds of cases, dozens of testimonies. Every lie Denton buried was about to dig him up instead. The next morning, I stood before a crowd on the courthouse steps. I didn't bring a microphone. I didn't need one. Phones were already rolling. I wore my uniform for the first time in years. Army blue polished pins, ribbons sharp as knives. I spoke plainly. I didn't come here to start a fight. I came here to expose one. And in doing so, I learned the fight was never just mine. This badge doesn't make me better than anyone in this city. It makes me responsible. Responsible to protect, to expose, and to rebuild what others have broken. A hand rose in the crowd, a young black girl, maybe 14. She asked, "Are you scared?" I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Yes." And that's how I know I'm doing the right thing. Later that day, I received an unmarked envelope slipped under my hotel door. Inside, a photo. Me. My brother. Crosshairs drawn over my face in black marker. No note. No return address. It wasn't the first threat I'd received, but it was the first time it felt personal. I closed the blinds, locked the door, sat down, and began my report for the federal hearing. Because you don't back down when the enemy gets louder. You get louder with truth. There's something strange about putting the uniform back on after years of wearing plain clothes. When I slipped into my army blues that morning, the fabric felt heavier than I remembered, not from weight, but from memory. It carried every mission, every loss, every decision I had made under pressure. And now it would carry something more, a declaration. I stood in front of the mirror in my hotel room, buttoning the jacket with slow precision. My reflection stared back with calm intensity. Captain Naomi Ellis, United States Army, now Internal Affairs Division, Department of Justice. The courtroom had made me visible. The slap had made me undeniable. But what came next would make me dangerous. The day began with smoke. Literally. Around 5:30 a.m., a fire broke out at the City Records Building. Arson. No injuries, but damage to the digital archive servers. Preliminary reports said surveillance footage had been wiped in the blaze. Convenient. Too convenient. I was on my second coffee when I got the call. "Captain Ellis." The voice crackled through the line. "We've got a situation. Precinct records possibly compromised. We're redirecting assets, but you need to get to City Hall. Now." I knew the play. Denton was panicking. He'd thought the courtroom slap was the climax. He had no idea it was only Chapter 1. Now he was pulling levers, covering tracks, calling in favors. But I wasn't alone anymore. That morning, over a dozen state attorneys, federal marshals, and civil rights lawyers flooded Palm City's municipal buildings. All under one banner: Investigation of Systemic Misconduct in the Palm City Police Department. At the center of it all, City Hall buzzed like a shaken beehive. Reporters hovered at the entrance. Protesters held signs just outside the barricades. And on the third floor, behind a thick wooden door, the Palm City Ethics Commission gathered for an emergency hearing. I walked in. Straight posture. Uniform crisp. Badge gleaming. Inside sat the commissioners. 3 men, 2 women, none smiling. Across from them, Chief Denton, his uniform perfect as always, face stone cold. There were no greetings, no handshakes, only eyes locked like chess players. The chair spoke first. "Captain Ellis, you are here today to provide formal testimony and submit evidence pertaining to misconduct within the Palm City Police Department." "Correct." I nodded. "Correct, sir. Be advised you are under oath." I didn't flinch. So is my conscience. I spoke for 2 hours. I read off dates, names, citations. I showed video clips. I described patterns how traffic stops became beatings, how officers reworded reports, how body cams were conveniently disabled. And then I played the slap. Projected on a screen 10 feet wide, the moment froze again. Officer Knox, raising his hand, my face turning from the impact, the room erupting behind me. Then my badge held high. Gasps. Again, even from the commissioners. Chief Denton tried to interject. "This is one incident. A provocation." I cut him off. "With respect, sir, one incident doesn't leave bruises like the ones Malik Jefferson had. One incident doesn't explain 8 unresolved complaints. One incident doesn't justify a fire at the records department 6 hours ago." I stepped forward. "You're not looking at one incident. You're looking at a culture." Later, during a recess, I stood in the hallway as the commission deliberated. The walls were lined with framed photographs of past mayors and officials. A timeline of power, mostly white, mostly male. Jerome joined me, his eyes pensive. "You were brilliant in there," he said. "I was honest," I replied. "Same thing today." I looked at the photo of Palm City's founding judge hung in gold trim. He looked like the kind of man who would have hated me. "I thought the battlefield ended overseas," I said. Jerome smiled faintly. "We just changed the terrain." At 3:00 p.m. the verdict came. The Ethics Commission unanimously voted to launch a full federal investigation into the Palm City Police Department. All high-ranking officials, Denton included, were suspended pending review. Officer Knox would remain in federal custody until trial. It was the first domino, and when it fell, others followed. By nightfall, the streets filled with light not from flames, but from candles. Civilians marched peaceful and proud. Young activists chanted names of the wrongfully arrested. Grandmothers waved flags. Teenagers held up posters with Malik Jefferson's face on them. I didn't lead the march. I walked quietly in the back. That's when a woman approached me. Small frame, sharp eyes, cane in hand. "You're Captain Ellis, right?" I nodded. She reached into her purse and handed me something. A badge. Not military, not federal. Old, rusted, from the 1960s. "My husband was the first black deputy in this county," she said softly. "They beat him for it. Burned crosses on our lawn. He never stopped serving. Never once pulled his gun." I took the badge in both hands, reverent. "He'd have been proud of you," she whispered, then disappeared into the crowd. That night, back in my room, I stood at the window. My uniform hung on a chair. My cheek was still faintly bruised but fading. Outside, sirens wailed, not in panic, but in retreat. For the first time in years, the city felt like it could breathe. Not healed, but breathing. Then came the knock. Soft, precise. 3 times. I checked the peephole. No one. I opened the door slowly, and there, lying on the floor, was a folded piece of paper. It read, "You think this is over, but we know where your mother lives." My blood ran cold. They weren't done. They never are. Threats lose their power when you've already walked through fire. But when they aim for someone you love, they become gasoline. I stood in the hallway of that hotel door, still open, the note trembling in my hand. My training kicked in like muscle memory. I scanned the corridor, eyes darting to security cameras. Nothing. No movement. Whoever delivered it knew how to be invisible. But their message, it screamed. They wanted me to back down. To go quiet. To forget that I'd exposed a legacy of brutality. But what they didn't realize, what they always underestimate, is what happens when they make it personal. They threatened my mother, and now I wouldn't stop until I burned every inch of their broken kingdom to the ground. I flew to Macon, Georgia that night. No press, no escort, just me, a service pistol, and a heart pounding with the fury of 1,000 sleepless nights. My mother lived in a small white house with a rust-red roof tucked behind a line of magnolia trees. She never liked the spotlight, never asked for my medals, but she taught me everything that mattered. When I stepped onto the porch, she was already waiting as if she felt it through the air. "Naomi," she said, eyes narrowing, "you bring ghosts with you tonight." I pulled her into an embrace before she could ask more. Her hug was warm, steady, familiar. "I need you to stay at Aunt Clara's for a few days," I said. She didn't ask why. She never did. She only looked into my eyes, saw the storm, and nodded. "Trouble found you again?" she asked. "No," I said, helping her pack. "It found you." By sunrise, I was back in Palm City. But I wasn't alone anymore. While I was gone, my brother Jerome had mobilized a coalition of civil rights lawyers, veteran cops, activists, tech specialists. They called it the Shield Within. Not a protest group, not a legal team, a resistance. Denton's empire had cracks. We were the crowbar. And first on the list, digging deeper into the arson that destroyed the city records. We started with the janitor. His name was Luis Carmona, an immigrant quiet, ignored by most. But he worked the graveyard shift at the records building, and the night of the fire, he was there. I found him sitting on the steps of St. Francis Church Rosary, in hand, fingers trembling like worn leaves. "I know they're watching me," he whispered. But I saw who did it. I know who I asked. His eyes darted toward the street. Then he leaned in. 2 men. One wore a fireman's jacket. The other a cop. Big. Shaved head. Tattoo of a snake on his neck. I froze. That tattoo wasn't a rumor. It belonged to Officer Greg Rattler Sykes Knox's right hand. Former military. Dishonorably discharged. Recruited into the force by Denton himself. He was still out there, still protected. And now, he was burning evidence. We moved fast. By noon, I had secured a subpoena for Sykes's personnel files. What I found chilled me. 2 excessive force complaints from 2017. Settled. Alleged ties to a known white nationalist militia. Never investigated. Disciplinary notes. Deleted by admin override. Only one name authorized that override. Chief Denton. That evening, Jerome and I confronted the city's deputy mayor, Lorraine Masters. a woman whose loyalty had always leaned whichever way the wind blew. We didn't ask. We didn't plead. We dropped the folder on her desk like a gavel. She flipped through it, eyes growing wide. Her voice cracked. "If this gets out—" "It's already out," I said. "You can either sink with Denton or steer the lifeboat." She sighed. "What do you want?" "Official sanction for an internal task force," I said. "Access to internal comms staff logs, surveillance archives, and control over all Knox-related investigations." She hesitated, then nodded. "You'll have it." And just like that, the shield within became official. But Denton didn't go quietly. He resurfaced on a local podcast that night, angry, rehearsed, and dripping with self-righteous rage. This so-called investigation. It's political. It's personal. One slap in a courtroom, and suddenly my department is under siege. You know what's really under attack, law and order. I watched the broadcast from my office, jaw tight. He was laying the groundwork for martyrdom, painting himself as the last good man holding back a flood of chaos. But what he didn't know was that I had already secured one final piece of evidence, an audio file, leaked by a young dispatcher who couldn't sleep at night. It was dated 2 days before the slap. In it, Denton was heard instructing Knox, "If she speaks out of turn, shut her down. Make a scene if you have to. She's not from here. She doesn't get it." His voice, clear, commanding, corrupted. The final nail. I released the recording at midnight. No press conference, no commentary. Just one post, one file, one caption. "Your silence has protected him long enough. The internet did the rest." By morning, her Denton resign was trending nationwide. Civil rights organizations demanded his arrest. The governor called for a formal inquiry. And Palm City woke up to something it hadn't known in years: hope. That afternoon, I visited the hospital. Malik Jefferson had been recovering quietly outside the cameras guarded round the clock. He was thin, pale, still limping. But when I entered the room, he smiled. "You really did it," he said softly. "No," I said, sitting beside him. "You did. You survived. You held on. And because of that, they couldn't erase you." He swallowed. "I thought I was going to die that night." I took his hand. "So did they. But you lived. And now, the city's starting to live too." I walked out into the parking lot, the sun warm on my face. My phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. "We warned you. This time we're coming." But I didn't flinch. I simply replied, "Good. I'll be waiting." They came at 2:47 a.m. I had just set my Glock on the nightstand and laid my head on the pillow when I heard the crunch of gravel outside the safe house. It wasn't loud, but it was wrong. Too slow for a raccoon, too precise for a drunk. I reached for the gun. The room was dim, the only light coming from the sliver beneath the door. I moved silently, my steps landing in memory-trained rhythms. I didn't breathe. I listened. Another step, then a whisper. Not words, just the shape of voices. Low. 2 men. Maybe 3. I moved to the side of the window, peeking through the curtain. Black boots, unmarked SUV, no headlights. 1 man at the porch. Another crouched by the fuse box. They weren't reporters. They weren't police. They were here for me. They didn't knock. They didn't speak. They kicked the door in. The first one through was tall-masked, holding a baton low and ready. I fired 1 shot, not to kill, but to warn, into the doorframe. The boom cracked through the air, and they hesitated. I used that second. Dropped low, slid across the floor, and struck the leader's knee with a blunt sweep. He fell with a curse baton dropping. The second man grabbed me by the arm, but I twisted, elbowed him hard in the throat, and sent him stumbling back into a cabinet. Third man had a taser. He fired. I dove behind the sofa as the prongs crackled against fabric. Adrenaline turned time into syrup. Everything slowed. I'd been in ambushes before Baghdad, Kandahar, Mogadishu. But never like this. Not in my own country. Not for telling the truth. I vaulted over the couch and fired a second warning shot into the ceiling. It bought me time enough for the security alarm to kick in. The siren howled like a war horn. Floodlights lit up the house, and just like that they ran. All three vanished into the SUV and peeled off down the dirt road. Cowards! I stood in the living room, heart pounding, surrounded by broken furniture and bullet smoke. I had faced enemies in uniforms and enemies in shadows, but nothing cut like this. This was home. By 4 a.m., the house was swarming with feds. Jerome arrived first, face pale with rage. "They tried to assassinate you." "No," I said flatly, "they tried to silence me." "That means we're close." "Close to what? Burning down the whole damn system." "Yes." I was relocated to a fortified site 3 hours north, old military barracks converted into a safe zone. I didn't sleep. I wrote. I compiled every file, every photo, every leaked document from every whistleblower who'd come forward since the slap. The shield within had grown. What started as a small team was now a full task force. Data analysts, legal advisors, former prosecutors, digital security experts. We were building a case for the Department of Justice to file criminal conspiracy charges against Knox, against Denton, against the entire chain of silence. But before we could file, there was another attack. This time it wasn't me. It was Luis Carmona. They found him unconscious in an alley near his apartment. Skull fractured. 2 broken ribs. No witnesses. No suspects. No arrests. When I visited him in the hospital, he could barely open his eyes. I didn't say everything he whispered. I leaned in. They have a room. Hidden. Not on the precinct maps. Basement. Behind the boiler room. What kind of room? Files. Tapes. Real footage. They keep the truth there. My pulse thudded. Every report we had so far was digital, intercepted, redacted. But this was different. This was physical proof. I assembled a covert team, 3 members of the Shield Within, all ex-military, all sworn to secrecy. We entered the precinct at 3 to 12 a.m. I still had my clearance badge. The receptionist barely looked up. Just another night shift. But this time we weren't looking for interviews. We were looking for ghosts. Down the boiler hallway we found a rusted steel door with no handle. Just a key code panel covered in grease. I knew Denton's birthday. I tried it. Click. It opened. Inside, it smelled like mildew and burnt plastic. Shelves of VHS tapes. Printed photos. Stacks of forgotten reports. Names scribbled in red. Victims. Suspects. Dead ends. And in the far corner, a locked file cabinet. We picked it. Inside a tape marked Oppiand 093. Internal use only. I slipped it into a player mounted on the wall. The footage flickered to life. Knox, Denton, Sykes, in a warehouse, surrounding a young black man in handcuffs. They were laughing. Denton raised a baton. The man screamed. The tape cut to black. It was undeniable. It was evil. And it was enough. We secured the evidence, filed a sealed submission to the DOJ, and scheduled a federal press conference. The date, exactly 1 month after the slap. On the morning of the announcement, I stood behind a podium dressed in uniform once more. A flag hung behind me. My mother sat in the front row, Jerome beside her. Louise, bruised but standing, nodded from the side. I looked at the cameras and spoke clearly. Today, I submit formal charges of conspiracy obstruction of justice and aggravated assault against Chief Morris Denton Officer Bradley Knox and all co-conspirators within the Palm City Police Department. I paused. They tried to break us with silence. We answered with truth. They tried to erase evidence. We rebuilt it from ashes. And when they came for me, I stood my ground not because I'm fearless, but because fear, when fed by courage, becomes justice. The crowd rose. Reporters shouted questions. But I just stood there, badge held high. The same badge that once felt like a shield. Now it was a sword. That night, the governor issued a statewide order for Denton's arrest. Knox's bail was revoked, Sykes on the run. But we knew where he was going, and we would be there first. They called it the bunker, a private compound tucked deep in the Everglades. No cell service, no listed property owner, no road signs. But our intel was clear. Officer Greg Rattler Sykes had fled there escorted by off-duty officers still loyal to Denton. It was more than a hideout. It was a sanctuary for cowards, and I was done letting them hide. At 3:00 a.m. we mobilized, 8 of us, former military federal agents and 2 internal affairs officers under direct DOJ approval. It wasn't a raid, it was a retrieval. No guns blazing, no glory, just justice. We traveled in 2 unmarked SUVs, headlights, off, eyes locked on the GPS coordinates Louise had whispered before slipping back into sedation. I wore black. No insignia. Just my badge clipped to my chest, visible and undeniable. I wanted Sykes to see it, to know who brought the end. We reached the perimeter at 4:12 a.m. Tall chain-link fences, floodlights, 2 patrol dogs, 1 roving sentry. Standard intimidation tactics. But we weren't here to play chess. While my team disabled the power supply, I moved through the trees, quiet as prayer. When the lights went out, the whole compound gasped. It was time. We breached the main house. First room clear, second room empty, third room occupied. Sykes stood in the center of what looked like a war room. Radios, monitors, a duffel bag half-zipped passport sticking out. He didn't reach for a weapon, he just smiled. "Well, look who finally grew teeth," he sneered. "Didn't think you'd come all this way, sweetheart. Don't call me that. Why scared? I'll hurt your feelings like your boyfriend Knox." I stepped forward, slow, deliberate. My teammates flanked me. The walls had maps, photos of me, of Jerome, of my mother's house. My fury burned cold. "You planned this," I said. Denton promised protection. Said if it got hot, we'd disappear. New names, new cities. We've done it before, but not this time, I whispered. He chuckled, then cracked his knuckles. "You're not walking out with me, Ellis. Not unless it's in a body bag." I raised my badge. "This badge outlives men like you." And in that moment he lunged. The fight was fast. He was strong but sloppy. Rage is heavy. It slows your hands. I ducked the first swing, landed 2 hits to his ribs, then swept his leg. He crashed into the desk, coughing blood at his lip. Before he could reach for the knife tucked at his ankle, my partner disarmed him with a single blow from a baton. We cuffed him. He thrashed, spit, cursed. But when we walked him out into the light of dawn, surrounded by federal agents and cameras, he went silent. That's how evil ends. Not with a scream, with surrender. By noon, Sykes was in federal custody. His confession recorded and public named Denton as the architect of a decade-long cover-up. Officers began to flip, one by one. The brotherhood they built crumbled under the weight of truth. Denton was arrested at his home mid-sentence during a live interview on a conservative talk show. They cut to commercial as the cuffs clicked. Poetic. In the days that followed, Palm City became a symbol of pain, of reckoning, of rebirth. The DOJ sent a reform task force. Civilian oversight was implemented. Body cams were standardized. Hundreds of sealed cases were reopened. And me, I stood on the courthouse steps once more, surrounded by victims who now had voices. A reporter asked Captain Ellis, "Are you done?" I paused, then smiled. No, justice isn't a moment. It's a movement. That evening, I sat with my mother on her porch back in Georgia. The air was sweet with magnolia. She looked at me, gentle and firm. "You all right, baby?" I nodded, tired, but whole. She took my hand. "Your father would have been proud." I didn't speak, just closed my eyes and breathed. They called me a hero. Some said I was reckless. Others said I was revolutionary. But I never wanted any of it. Not the press. Not the headlines. Not the viral video of a slap that shook a city. All I ever wanted was the truth to mean something again. 6 months had passed since the night they came for me. Since I stood on the courthouse steps and called out a system that thrived in silence. Since I walked back into the fire, not with a weapon, but with memory honor, and every name they tried to erase. Palm City wasn't the same anymore. Knox convicted on all counts. Stripped of his badge in open court the same way he stripped others of dignity. Denton serving 20 years for conspiracy obstruction and directing organized civil rights violations. No parole, no applause. Just an old man in a cold jumpsuit. Sykes pleaded guilty in exchange for full testimony. But this story was never about them. It was about us. The shield within evolved. What started as a resistance became an organization nationwide, community-led, focused on accountability and reform. Civilian review boards, training programs, legal defense for victims of brutality. We built something they couldn't unburn, and we named it after the very symbol they had twisted for their own gain, the badge. But this time it belonged to everyone. I returned to Palm City one last time, not for a trial, not for a press event, but for a ceremony. Malik Jefferson was graduating. He'd spent months in physical therapy fighting his way back to walking, speaking, and believing again. That afternoon, in a hall filled with families and light, he walked across a stage in a blue robe and accepted his high school diploma. His mother cried. So did Jerome, and when he saw me standing at the back, he raised that diploma like a flag and said into the mic, "For the ones they tried to break, and the woman who wouldn't let them." The crowd roared, but I just smiled. That night, alone in my hotel room, I finally opened the box, the one they sent me from the Pentagon 2 weeks earlier. It contained a commendation, a silver eagle pin, a formal retirement notice, and a handwritten note from the Secretary of Defense. "Your service both in war and in peace has honored this nation beyond measure. You didn't just wear the uniform. You carried the burden of justice." I placed the letter beside my badge. Then I pulled something else out of the box. A photo, me, in uniform, just after the courtroom, cheek bruised, head high. I hung it on the wall, not as a trophy, as a reminder, because justice isn't clean. It's messy. It's painful. It demands everything and guarantees nothing. But if you're lucky, if you hold on through the threats, the fear, the silence, You don't just expose a corrupt officer. You wake up a city. The next morning, as I walked through the airport, a TSA agent paused me. He was black, young, eyes sharp. "Captain Ellis." I turned, nodded. He gave a soft smile. "We still talk about you." I nodded again. "Talk about Malik. Talk about truth." Then I walked through the gate. No spotlight, no badge. Just a woman with scars and peace in her chest. Epilogue. A message to you. If you're reading this and you're in a place where power suffocates, where truth is bent, where silence feels like survival, remember this. You don't have to be loud to be brave. You don't have to wear a badge to protect. You don't have to wait for permission to rise. Sometimes the first step toward justice is standing back up after the slap. In the end, it wasn't the badge that changed everything. It wasn't the courtroom, the cameras, or even the slap. It was courage to stand up when the system expected silence. It was truth to speak when speaking came with danger. And it was community people coming together to say, enough. Naomi Ellis didn't just expose corruption. She reminded a nation that accountability doesn't start at the top. It starts with us. If you ever feel powerless, remember this. One voice can expose a lie. One step can spark a movement. And one moment of bravery can outlast generations of silence. Whether you wear a uniform or carry invisible scars, your truth matters. Don't let the world convince you to sit down when you were born to stand. If this story moved, inspired you, or made you believe again in the power of truth, subscribe for more powerful, true-to-life dramas that shed light on injustice and uplift courage. Drop a comment. What part of Naomi's story hit you the hardest? Like and share this video, so her story reaches someone who needs to hear it. Because every time we speak up, we make it harder for hate to hide.